Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst. Glad to have you along for another discussion. It's my sincere belief that Christians need to talk about a lot of things. A lot of times we're reluctant to talk about a lot of things, and especially things in the culture, because we don't want to offend people. We don't want to cause division in the body of Christ. We don't want to upset people, alienate people, cause unnecessary division, and so on and so forth. There are all kinds of reasons why it's play it safe not to talk about things, but as Christians, we have God's truth in the Word of God, and we have God's principles, and we have His instructions on how to live, and so we need to be out and about in the culture talking about everything that's important, everything that pertains to human life on this planet Earth. And so we need to be talking about what God has said in His Word and apply those things to the specific issues in our culture. And today we're going to be talking about an issue that will impact every single human being in the United States. And also this pertains to other nations too that have similar government structures. And the question is it okay? Is it legitimate? Is it godly for a person who votes against big government to actually take part in some of the government programs that are offered as benefits for citizens? So you have a situation where, as biblical, evangelical, Bible-believing Christians, we consistently vote against a big form of government. We want to limit the size of government. Now, the reason for that is very simple. We understand that human nature is such that all people are sinful. All men, all women, all children, people are sinful. They're fallen. Since Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden, all of us, ancestors of Adam and Eve, have been tainted with that original sin. And so our very nature, naturally speaking, is towards sin and selfishness. And so with that as a foundational truth, when you go and you look at government, then it stands to reason you would want to limit the power of any branch of government so that no sinful populated branch of government becomes more powerful than any other. So there would not be any checks and balance. There would not be any accountability. And you would have this monster power rise within the population of the government, and that sinful population within that branch could effectively spread evil all over the land. And so we want to limit the size of government so that the sinful effects of the fall do not become too concentrated in one element in society. And so whether the Founding Fathers knew this explicitly or not, some of them did, some of them didn't. You have a mixture of godly, biblical Christians, and then you have also some of those Founding Fathers who were secular humanists with a slight Christian veneer, nominal Christianity mixed in, and whether they knew explicitly or implicitly, they all realize that you have to have checks and balances on sinful humanity, or else one group of sinful humanity will rise up and get too powerful and then be in a position to perpetuate their own selfish ends and their own sinful practices on everyone and impose it. And so Christians have been traditionally against a big government. And we're also against any government that doesn't have proper checks and balances. Now, in our democracy here in the United States, we have three branches. And that's good because one branch getting more powerful, the other two branches can check that one expanding powerful branch and bring it more in line. And so you have a situation almost like a bucket of crabs, where if one crab is starting to crawl up the side to get out, the other crabs can grab him and bring him down so that he is not in a special position. So they're all sort of in this together, and they all check and balance each other. And a powerful, corrupt leader cannot arise without checks and balances. And there's a good chance that he will be checked before he can do the ultimate damage. So, as Christians, we are unabashedly uh, against big government in the sense of here's this state expanding out, more powerful. Its tentacles reaching further into the society, into every area, controlling it. We're against that. And if you look at the polls, evangelical Christians consistently vote against that kind of government, that expanding, you might call it a socialist vision of government. The socialist vision is definitely one that includes a huge, powerful, centralized government. And then ultimately in the socialist vision, there is communism. Now, communism is not qualitatively different from socialism. It's just quantitatively different than socialism. It's socialism on steroids. That's what communism, you might call it. It is the ultimate totalitarian control, whereas socialism in its different forms around the world is a more milder form of communism. And as Christians, we tend to fight against socialism and communism because we see that those forms of government fail to take into account the sinful nature of humanity. See, communists and a lot of the secular socialist governments, they totally disavow and deny the sinfulness of human beings. They deny the biblical account in Genesis where it talks about the Adam and Eve fell, and then the children of Adam and Eve are also in that original sin, and they're fallen and they're sinful by nature. See, the socialist and communist governments don't recognize that. They say, "Oh no, human is perfectibility. We can perfect the human. We can mold and shape through social institutions and make him perfect." And the Christian says, "No, we will not achieve perfection until we reach heaven, and until the Lord sets things right. And we, on our own sinful terms, cannot do that." So, as Christians, we vote consistently against big government. Now, the problem is when we vote against big government every 4 years, especially at the presidential election, is it hypocritical for us to then take advantage of some of the benefits of the programs that the big government offers? And for example, this came home close to me when my cell phone carrier, offered me what is called an ACP credit from the government. And they said, "Would you like to apply? Would you like to see if you get this ACP credit on your carrier, on your cell phone?" And I said, "Well, what would that involve?" "Well, you would get $30 a month, every month, subsidized by the U.S. government to help you afford cell phone." I said, "Well, go ahead and apply and see what happens." Well, they applied, and I was okayed for the ACP, Affordable Connectivity Program credit. And this is a government program that offers a $30 benefit, $30 off on your cell phone each month. So that adds up. I mean, if you're talking about a year, that's $360 a year that you would get off on your cell phone bill. Well, I mean, if you didn't have any other considerations, yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And I did eventually end up taking that credit because I said, "Wow, that's a great deal. $30 off, everything helps." And then I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, wait a minute. Is this hypocritical? Is this a contradiction between my voting against big government, and here is a big government program that is now benefiting me, that I qualified for, and I'm taking? So am I playing a hypocrite? Am I being a double-minded man? Am I being two-faced? Am I contradicting my own principles in taking it? Now, at one point, about I think it was about 10 years ago, I had just read a book by a man named Charles Sykes, and he had written a book, a best-selling book, about the problem of an expanded government and how these programs are now being expanded over and over and over and over in just every area, from farm subsidies to guaranteed student loans to free school lunches for kids to free school breakfasts for kids. It's just every imaginable program that is being pushed out by an expanding federal government. And his last chapter in his book it says to don't take these programs, resist the urge to sign up for a program or receive a program if it's offered you, because you're just expanding the big federal government. And I believe for the most part that is true philosophy. But on the other hand, you can take that philosophy too far and you can actually be shooting yourself in the foot in the process. For example, I've heard some people say that Social Security itself is a product of a big expanded government. And Social Security is some of what happened back when Franklin Delano Roosevelt and others were looking around and seeing the communist revolution taking place in Russia and seeing all of the programs and the benefits of a huge expanded government. And so they got on that bandwagon and said, well, we're going to implement something called Social Security, and we're going to get everyone on it. And then when they reach their old age, the workers will have something to fall back onto, and this will help them in their retirement years. Well, it is a good concept and it works nice, but the difference between a government program and Social Security, strictly speaking, is that when you're a worker, you pay into Social Security as retirement. You pay into it, and I think it's right now up to 6.5% the worker pays, and then the employer pays the other half. So they contribute half of your Social Security, and then you contribute half of the Social Security amount to the federal government every paycheck. And so you are paying into this retirement account. So it's not a strictly government handout. It is actually something that you are investing in for the 40 or 50 years that you're in the workforce. And then when you get to that retirement age, you have something that you've invested in. You have taken your hard-earned money every paycheck and you put it in there with your employer's contribution, and you get this back when you're in your retirement age. So it's not a pure government giveaway goodie that we see all the time in these expanded government programs. So in my view, Social Security has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is something like this affordable connectivity program that I'm recently on, that was offered to me and I accepted and receive it. Is that something that someone who is for limited government, who actually votes against big government programs, is that something that we can, in good conscience, take, or is that hypocritical? And you might also ask yourself, for example, on your taxes every year, there is an earned income tax credit. And if you do your taxes with tax software, they actually ask you to go through and figure out and fill out the calculations and plug in the numbers and see if you qualify for the earned income tax credit. It's on every tax form every year, every time you have to fill it out once a year. And so you go through the calculations, and if you qualify, you actually get some money back from that program. So that is another example of a government program that is actually somewhat of a giveaway a goodie that the government is throwing in there to help people if they qualify. And so, again, you have to ask yourself, okay, so what would I do then if I didn't want to take that, if I didn't want to get some of that extra money back? Would I have to redo the whole tax code? And would I have to figure my taxes and everything else? It would get pretty complicated. So I think most of us say, well, no, if it's coming to taxes that I've already paid in from my payroll every time I get a check, and I can get a credit, an earned income tax credit. If I can get a credit, well, I'm going to take it because I want to pay my fair taxes, but I don't want to pay extra if I don't have to. And I think that's our basic philosophy when we fill out our taxes every year. We will pay our fair share of taxes, and we want to pay what we owe the government, but we don't want to pay a penny more, right? We don't want to have to give the government any more of our money so that they can misspend it, and misappropriate is a better word, and do what they do. You've all heard about the military expenses. You've heard about the hammer that cost, $10,000, and these purchases are so outrageous, and they're definitely way out of line with the regular cost of these items. But somehow the government is so sloppy in its accounting that it gets itself into trouble by overpaying most of the time and getting ripped off by these vendors. But I think most of us would say, well, yeah, the earned income tax credit on our tax form every year is part of that big expanded government problem, and we vote against expanded government every chance we get. But I will take the earned income tax credit if it's offered to me, and we do. And I think the same way with this affordable connectivity plan that is offered to cellular customers. If it'll take $30 off the cellular plan every month, that's a blessing. Even though if we had to vote on it and we were able to actually vote and say, should we, as a government, get involved in subsidizing cell phones for everyone, we would vote against it because, again, that is another big government program. And you have to remember that, especially now, it would be one thing is if the government was balancing its books every year and you had people in Washington who would look at the amount of revenue they generate through taxes and maybe a few other things that they generate income. And then every year they balance the books and they come up with a budget that fits the amount of income that comes in. And so every year the income and outgo is balanced, and so have no problem with that. I think we would still say we don't want a big bloated government for the reasons I mentioned before, the fallen nature of man. When you have a concentration of power, what is the Lord Acton's famous quote, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if you have a concentration of power and money in Washington, D.C., you want to make sure that's limited, because all of a sudden that power central will become a monster. And then at some point, future point, you won't be able to even control it, and it'll get way out of hand and it'll become corrupt. And then you'll have this massive totalitarian regime that has huge amounts of money coming in and can control every aspect of your life. And that's what we call a totalitarian state. We don't want that. So we want to limit the scope of the federal government and also the state governments, for that matter. You don't want bloated state governments and layers upon layers of bureaucracy and every third person working for some kind of a government entity. You don't want that, because that is on the road to socialism and eventually on the road to communism. So we oppose that, and we do it on the basis of principle. But when you're relating to government and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what is okay and what is not okay, and what is hypocritical and what is consistent, you have to ask these questions. You have to say, well, if I'm against big government, does that mean that I will never, ever um, receive or take a benefit that is given to me from the government, even if it's offered to me? Now, again, there's a difference between going out and looking for the benefit to try to work the system. I mean, there are people who basically go looking and spend a lot of time and effort looking for every single giveaway they can find from the government, any kind of benefit program, and they'll sign up for it just because they want more and more and more. And they don't care about the size of government. They don't have any kinds of preferences either way. They just want more and more. They're greedy. And obviously, that is wrong. Obviously, a lot of the programs that are initiated, at least at the beginning of the government, are for the purposes of helping people who need that assistance and help in their life. And what happens in a big government is that the well-intentions of those people that create these programs often is good, but then over time it becomes institutionalized and it becomes a big bureaucracy. So it's just a business that's expanding itself. So, for example, you see the multiplication of all these programs, and you see, especially, for example, in the early days of the 60s and the 70s, when a lot of these programs started initially, you had disastrous results that actually happened in some of the bigger cities, where you would have programs that would provide for mothers and their children housing, food, clothing, all kinds of needs, government assistance for these single women with children. But little did they realize, and this has been documented, little did they realize that by giving direct assistance to these single women, you created a bigger problem, because single women began to realize, hey, if I have a child, I'll get free housing, I'll get free food, I'll get free healthcare, I'll get free clothing, I'll get free, all these programs will benefit me. All I have to do is have children, and not just one, but many. And the more I have, the more money I have, and I can live a fairly decent life. I can have an apartment, I can afford food and all this stuff through the beneficiary of the government. And that totally destroys and interrupts the natural motivations of young women to find husbands and settle down and have children and raise a family. So you see this in the inner cities, especially, what the terrible, awful policies of a big government giveaway program will do. And it's caused disaster in some of the larger cities, New York City, Chicago, LA, and even in all of the cities across the country, when these programs can actually come into families and divide families and social interaction between men and women, and cause distortions in families and child rearing. It just can really detrimentally affect the entire society, and we've seen that over the last 50 years when these programs have increased. So there is a line there, but I finally concluded as a Christian that there's nothing inherently wrong with using some of the benefits that the government allows us to use if we qualify, as long as we don't push that beyond a line. And I'm not exactly sure where that line is, but we have to think these through. I mean, the goal is not to get as much as you can from the federal government. But on the other hand, you have to realize that even though we vote against big government, and even though we vote to limit the scope of federal government, when the leftist, liberals, progressive, Democratic Party, for example, gets in power, they expand the government. And it's not just they expand it for their voters, they expand it for everyone. And when the inflation kicks in, it doesn't just affect the people who voted for that liberal expanded government. It affects everyone. And so we have to pay more. It's a hidden tax on our economy, not even including the outright taxation that we get from federal government, that we get from our state government, our county, our property taxes. All of these things are going up. So on the one hand, we don't want to be greedy and try to find every single thing that we can milk from the government programs. But on the other hand, we have to realize that we are the ones, as taxpayers, we are the ones who are actually paying for these programs, other than the amount that we're borrowing and deficit spending and printing money in the government. We as taxpayers are the ones that have to pay for these benefits. And so on the one hand, you don't want to go out looking for these programs and trying to find as many as you can to sign up for, because that's abusing the system. But on the other hand, you shouldn't actually feel bad in taking on a program that's offered to you that will actually help you. For example, like the earned income tax credit. I mean, if you pay into that with your taxes, and if there is a liberal Democrat who's going to expand the government, it makes no sense that you should be the only one who doesn't benefit from some of these programs that would help you. So, so every 4 years at the presidential election, I'm going to vote for a candidate who will limit the scope of the federal government and will actually curtail as much as possible expanding programs of benefits, because it's gotten so far out of a line and there's so much corruption and abuse that takes place. But on the other hand, I am not going to say to myself and be some kind of a purist and say, hey, I will never take any kind of a benefit from the government because I'm a small government guy. No, because I realize that my tax paying pays into the government and then they give out those benefits. So I may as well, if I don't go into excess, I may as well benefit with the few times that I'm able to get a benefit from some of these expanded programs. So I hope this has been a helpful discussion. I hope that you are grappling through these issues again. Again, the issue is, can someone who votes consistently for smaller government and limited government, can a Christian who votes for limited government take in any way any of the benefits of some program here or there that is offered from the government? And I would say yes, but with qualifications. So you don't want to get greedy. You don't want to take more than you should. And I hope that's been a helpful discussion. We'll talk to you next week. God bless.